Hello children, good morning. All of you are fine, I hope. So welcome you all to the science class. So if you remember, in the last class we have started a new chapter, materials and solutions, and you all learnt about the different states of matter, how they are arranged, and how we get a solution based upon solute and solvent. You learned in detail about what is solute and what is solvent, and which is known as the universal solvent, and for which reason it is called as universal solvent, and based upon two things, that is whether we are taking a liquid and a solid as a solute and solvent, how substances are classified, that is soluble substances and insoluble substances, and when you are taking both the solute and solvent as liquids, how they are mixing with one another. Depending upon that, you learnt about the liquid solubility and two types of solutions, homogeneous solutions and heterogeneous solutions, right? So I hope all the things that had been covered in the last video you have been understood. And now let us further continue with the remaining concept of the same chapter, children. So you learned how materials are getting mixed with one another and how they are forming solutions. So the next part of the chapter what we are going to learn today is how the methods of separation. So when we are mixing two or more substances with one another, there might be some unwanted substances which would have got mixed with one another, or some irregularities will be present in those substances. So why do we have to do separating techniques or methods of separations? So to remove the unwanted substances from the solutions or from any mixtures, we are doing this methods of separation. So mixture means nothing, children. Mixing, when two or more substances combine with one another, it forms a mixture. So now here in this class we'll be concentrating on the methods of separation. So mixtures can be separated as based on the properties of the components present in two ways. So depending upon the components present in it, the mixtures can be separated in two ways. So separation of insoluble solids from liquid mixtures. So insoluble solids, that is insoluble substances from a liquid mixture. So if a mixture contains some insoluble solids, so we have to remove that. So based upon that, we are going to learn few techniques, and next way is separation of soluble solutes from liquid mixtures. Even when a liquid mixture has the completely soluble solid, how to separate that also we'll be learning by an example or by a technique. So basically this class will be learning, or you will be learning about how mixtures are separated from one another in two ways: separation of insoluble solids from liquid mixtures, and next separation of soluble solids from liquid mixtures. So for separation of insoluble solids from liquid mixtures, we are going to learn two techniques, and for separation of soluble solids from liquid mixtures, we are going to learn a single technique, children. So technique means it is not that heavy so that you have to take confusion, or if you have to take tension and all, nothing. General techniques which you have observed in your house where your mother is cooking in your kitchen, or yes, basically that technique, and which you have already learned, simple techniques. Okay, so we are going to learn that. Yes, so as I told, we'll first learn about separation of insoluble solids from liquid mixtures by two techniques. The first technique is sedimentation and decantation, and then the second method is filtration. So sedimentation and decantation. So new terminologies, children. So first learn how to pronounce it properly: sedimentation and decantation. Okay, so the names are slightly big, but the concept is very simple, children. So let me take an example of your kitchen itself where your mother is cooking the rice. So what she does, first she takes a vessel, puts 1 or 2 glasses of rice, then directly she'll not add water and keep it in the vessel, right? Keep it to boil. She first carefully washes that rice because there will be some impurities in the raw rice, right? So to just throw them away, she first cleanly washes the rice with water. That you might take an example as sedimentation. Yes, in the process of sedimentation, insoluble impurities settles at the bottom of the liquid to form the sediment. One more example you take a glass of water and 1 more glass of sand, mix it with one another. As I told earlier in the last class, what happens, the finer mud particles will get mixed with water and forms brown color of the water, and the heavier sand particles will settle down at the bottom. So this is sedimentation. So when you mix the 2 solute and solvent, and where solute is not soluble in water, it will go settle at the bottom of the container in which you are mixing. So allowing that heavier particles to settle down at the bottom of the vessel or the container is known as sedimentation, and what goes and settle at the bottom is known as sediment. Fine, understood? Next, coming back to the example of rice, preparing rice. So she washes the rice, and after that what she does, with the same water will she keep it for boiling? No, she just carefully throws the water. Carefully means she is not spilling out any rice out of the water, only that water has to come down. So slowly she'll just bend it and then allows the impure water to pass through. That is known as decantation. So decantation is the process of gently pouring the clear liquid into another beaker without disturbing the sediments. So without disturbing, so why we have to not disturb that? If you disturb, what happens? Again it will get mixed with the water. So there is no use of doing this technique. So carefully you have to pour only that clear liquid out of the container. So this process is known as decantation. Okay, sedimentation and decantation method. I hope you understood. Next, one more technique which we are learning under the same thing of separating insoluble solids from liquid is filtration. So take the example which I took earlier when I was saying sedimentation and decantation. So you have allowed that heavier sand particles to settle down at the bottom, and you have carefully transferred that liquid which was brown color into the another beaker. Now if you observe that beaker wherein you have transferred the liquid, that liquid is also not clear, children. It also has impurities. What are those impurities? The sand particle which has mixed with water is not pure because it still contains impurities. The sand has been dissolved. So to get still more clear liquid, you have to do one more technique known as filtration. So general example of your kitchen, if I take, after preparing the tea or coffee, directly your mother will not put that into the glass and she'll serve it. No, you have seen she'll take a filter and then she'll filter the tea or coffee so that she'll get the dust that is nothing but the tea powder or the coffee powder, and then only she'll serve it to people who have come to the house. The same thing here also. The clear liquid which has been dissolved the sand has impurities. So they will follow this filtration technique. So in this filtration technique, they will take a funnel, children, and into that funnel they will get a filter paper. So filter paper is a paper which has tiny pores in that which is not visible, but still it contains that. So when in the funnel, they'll just make a cone of the filter paper and place that filter paper inside the funnel and pour that liquid from decantation process, and what happens, this filter paper, it has small pores in that, so all the impurities which has been dissolved in the water will most probably gets collected in the filter paper, and you will get still more clear liquid in this filtration method. So heterogeneous mixture composed of solids and liquids can be separated by filtration. So heterogeneous solutions you have learnt in the previous class. So heterogeneous solutions, it can't, wherein the solute and solvent has not been uniformly dissolved, so it has impurities. To separate such solutions, filtration method is used, and filtration is a method of separating an insoluble solid from a solution. So it mainly consists of a filter paper which has tiny pores on it, which filters the soluble impurities. So this two techniques is used to separate insoluble solids from liquid mixtures. So which are those? Sedimentation and decantation, filtration. Next, moving on to the next technique and the last concept of this chapter, it is evaporation. So evaporation you have learnt in your water cycle. When you are learning water cycle, the first step which comes is evaporation, children. Yes, why evaporation comes here? When there is soluble solid in a mixture, if you have a necessity to separate that, you have to go through this method. So water cycle, evaporation. In general, what you have learnt about evaporation, if you say me, evaporation using sun's rays getting back, yes, while hanging on the wet clothes, your mother washes the clothes and she'll hang on the wet clothes, right? So morning if she has hung that onto the wire, and evening if you go and see that in summer times, will that cloth will be still wet, children? No. All the water would have gone. Where did that water go? Yes, the sun's rays has absorbed all the water molecules that were present in the wet clothes, and by the evening the clothes will be dry enough. So evaporation process is same thing. In this chapter I am not teaching you anything very special. Evaporation means, yes, using of the sun's heat rays, we conduct this process in whichever the ways we want. Here evaporation method, we are using it to separate the soluble substances from liquid mixture. Example, you have seen the powder salt, right? So common salt which you eat in a house to add to all the dishes. Yes, how do they get that? They'll get it from seawater. So you know seawater you cannot directly consume it because it will be salty. Yes, the salt we eat is mainly got from the seawater. So how are they separating that seawater and the salt? By evaporation method. So allowing the liquid to evaporate, leaving the soluble substance behind is the main idea of evaporation technique. Example, heating sugar water. One more example which you can do it at home. So try to dissolve some amount of sugar in water and keep that for boiling. So allow all the water to evaporate, and finally you will get a black color residue. That residue is nothing but the sugar or the salt, whichever. So mainly they use this technique to get salt from the seawater, children. So they'll prepare small pits and they allow that water to get evaporated, and they'll get all the salt as the residue. That will not be pure enough. So in factories they'll just undergo purification process, and finally we'll get whatever the iodized salt which we use in our kitchen. Yes, the water evaporates and finally the soluble substance will be left out as the residue. So this is the evaporation technique, children. So in this class, if we go back, we learned about sedimentation and decantation method and filtration and evaporation. These three are the separating techniques which you have to learn in this class, children. So as you go on in your higher classes, you will still have different separating techniques. You will be going to learn how to separate substances from one another. So this much I hope is enough for this class, and that completes the chapter materials and solutions, children. Go through the video, both the videos, you just go through it once, and again if you get any further doubts, please get it clarified in your discussion class. Thank you, children.